Today I have on the amazing Coach Linda Blade. It's an honor, and how about we just launch right into it? Linda, let's get going. Tell us about you.
Well, hello. It's totally my honor to be on your program, Lindsay, and I am just so grateful for any opportunity to speak on the issue of gender identity and sports and women's sports. Um, I write this at this moment. I am a coach in Canada, and I am president of Athletics Alberta, which is the track and field association up here in Canada. But um, I have I got a scholarship, Title IX, in the States at University of Maryland back in the 80s. And Title IX is so important to me because my life just would not be what it is right now without having had that opportunity. So I'm very grateful to the women of the USA who fought for the right to have special, zones of female only sports and special, like equal privileges and rights as the men do. And somewhere in between there, between me having a scholarship and going to University of Maryland and being a coach up here in Canada, I was even an international lecturer, and I worked with World Athletics doing courses for Muslim women in Islamic countries. And so one of my famous trips was going into Tehran, Iran in 1995. I had to put on the veil, the hijab, and go and teach women how to coach the girls. And I know how hard, I mean, in every culture, women have to work so hard at just having the access to sport and to the facilities. And so when I became president of Athletics Alberta here in this province up in Canada, which was in 2014, I had to be involved in policy discussions about sports. And so I was at a national meeting in 2018 where all of a sudden we were told that, it's a proposed policy that we should allow male athletes, people who are born male who identify as women, we should just accept them into women's sports without any questions. And I mean, it just hit me like a sucker punch to the gut because I thought, there's no way that's fair. And, you know, having been an athlete and even national champion, I was in the heptathlon and, I competed with Jackie Jonah Kersey. And I mean, I competed with the top women in the world. And in those days, we were always being tested. Like, how many times I had to pee in a cup just to test whether I was cheating, like taking drugs. And, it just so much effort was put into making sure sport was being fair. And, if I were to dope, and even as a top athlete, it would have given me maybe a 9-10% advantage. But to have a male body in a female sport would be up to like a 50% advantage. And so what these leaders were telling us essentially was doping equals bad, which is 9% better. But males and female sports is good, which is like 50% improvement. So it just was so bizarre. I just couldn't make heads or tails of it. And so that was like in 2018. And so by now in 2021, I've now been sort of trying to wrap my head around this for the last 3 years. And frankly, most people will know me as Coach Blade, at Coach Blade on Twitter. And the reason I actually started tweeting a lot was because I was trying to have private meetings and do this sort of the right way, go through the government bureaucracy and do it the right way through all the right backroom channels. But nobody would listen to me. Nobody would listen to me. So I felt like even if they did listen to me, it's sort of like the old obligatory, yeah, we get it, but we really can't do anything about this. So, I mean, I really thought, what? Am I the only one going crazy here? Or so I just kind of started putting out little things on Twitter, just like to see, is anybody else having to deal with this? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's how we all kind of get into this thing is like, we all feel like we're doing this alone. And then we start gaining friends and colleagues and start sharing our stories. And the one inspiring thing of all this, to be honest, Lindsay, is um, this is the first women's movement in history where we do get to talk to each other. Um, it's really exciting to see what
Truly
might
is,
happen with
Linda.
that.
That's a great point. That's
Yeah.
so true. yeah, empowering and amazing. I've I've had so many doors shut in my face in terms of friends, but
Hmm.
man, a double have opened with each person that has technically dropped me as a human.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. Just how much more powerful we can be in numbers and just listening to each other and well, slightly having the ability to speak about this, even though a lot of us are being removed from various platforms, Twitter, Discord, Facebook, Instagram,
Hmm.
TikTok. I mean, everything. It's insane. I don't think enough people hear about that as well. Someone should do a big blog post or documentary about just the women being silenced, really. But
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the thing is, we're just beginning. Like, this is
yeah,
only the beginning. If they
mm-hmm.
think that a few little cancellations are going to make us shut up and go away, this is just,
Doesn't work at
this
all.
isn't going to work. I mean,
No,
I always say that women, like, we're the concrete, we're the cement of society. I mean, the in general, like, we're the ones who talk. If you go talk to any family or any, I know this is
mm-hmm.
stereotype, but if you talk to any married couple, it's almost always the women who, they plan the social activities, or they invite people over for dinner, or they talk to their neighbors and they figure out what's going on. I mean, we are the glue. And I mean, there's just no way that you're going to shut us down.
That
Like,
doesn't make
there's
any
no way
sense.
that's going to happen.
It's not gonna last. They're trying, but if you
Yeah,
remove us from one platform, we'll just go to another. Like
exactly.
whatever.
And we have
It's
options. Like, we can
yeah,
start talking to each other on telephone, or we can text. I mean, what are
yeah,
they thinking? They're just going to make us all ignore the obvious for
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
decade?
Yeah, it's a. I don't get it either. I'm like, this has to inevitably wind up failing. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm gonna launch into some questions because I
sure.
definitely have quite a few here. Really good ones. First one is, can you outline the Olympic Committee policy in
Hmm.
respect to the transgender athletes? What does the Olympics think about all this?
Okay, can I give you a quick historical
Yes,
progression?
please.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so until 1996, there was what they called gender testing. So, in other words, there were different ways in which, when women showed up to the Olympic Games, they had a little bit of an exam or something that would say that they were truly women. And
Hmm.
in my day, like earlier on, it was quite, sometimes the measures were a little bit embarrassing. And obviously, like, you hear this, the most extreme horror stories are, of course, back in the 60s. Maybe there was one Olympics where they had to be the nude parade before the doctor or something, so to
Oh,
see that everybody was a woman. But by the time um, I was, in competing internationally, that's not how it worked at all. What you did was you just got a quick, took a Q-tip, and they did a cheek swab. So they just put the Q-tip inside your cheek, and then they took a little swab of the sort of the skin cells on your cheek, and then they would put that through a test. And what they were testing for was these little objects. Like, you have two X chromosomes in the body, and every cell has like a active X chromosome, and the other X chromosome goes into this little ball. So it's called a bar body. And so they were looking for the bar bodies. So, but that test turned out to not be quite as maybe accurate as it should have been. Yet, sometimes there were false negatives. So, in other words, sometimes the bar body wouldn't show up, and they might assume that that person's a male. Then it got the Y chromosome instead of another X chromosome. But very, very rarely did they make a mistake. And even if that happened, they could do other kinds of testing. So in the Atlanta Olympics in 1996, they actually offered a survey of all the female athletes saying, is this demeaning to you that we test your gender? And 80% of the women said, first of all, 80% said they wanted to keep having gender testing as a gatekeeping.
mm-hmm.
And 96% of the women said it was not demeaning in the least. And they even published that study, that survey. They published it in Nature magazine. And so, even though um, they actually did listen to the female athletes in terms of giving them a survey, which they hardly ever do, they didn't listen to us. They basically concluded in that same article in Nature in 2000 that, oh, because this is so demeaning and potentially humiliating to female athletes, we'll stop gender testing. So they surveyed us, but they didn't actually believe us. And so they stopped the gender testing. And then right away in 2003, they admitted, they changed their policy to include transsexuals, people who actually had surgery. They had to have had surgery for 2 years. And so there was the gatekeeping, which was the surgical requirement. They said very few people would go through that just to be in sports. So you have to believe them. It's, transsexual male who, has the surgical transition. And there were a few of them showed up at that point, then started competing. But here's the thing. Back in the back rooms, the few transsexual, the males who, some of them had surgery, and now they were complete castration, and they had zero testosterone being produced by their removed testes, obviously. So they were finding it hard to compete. So, or train, because you need a certain amount. If you're a male body, especially if your hormones, your genetics are male, you need a certain amount of testosterone to thrive, right? So because they weren't having natural forms of testosterone, they were having to inject testosterone to train, and then they were exceeding the medical limit of injected, like exogenous testosterone. So they kept asking for these medical exemptions from the IOC and saying, look, we need to train, but we can't. So can we have an exemption? So I think what happened was the IOC just got tired of having to deal with medical exemptions for transsexual males. So by 2015, they decided, no, forget about the surgery, forget about all this. Just self-ID and live as a woman for a year, and then try to keep your hormones level, your testosterone level below 10 nanomoles per liter, and which is like still 8 nanomole per liter higher than your average. Even the top female barely ever gets above 2 nanomoles per liter. So the males were coming from maybe like a normal male level would be like maybe 30 nanomoles per liter. And then they had to keep their levels under maybe 10. And then they called that sort of somehow equivalence, that the IOC decided, oh, maybe that would be okay just to have them identify as women and live as a woman for a year. That was the other requirement. You had to live as a woman for a year, whatever that means.
How do you prove that? I really don't get that at all. Like, do you send a photo to the committee of you wearing a dress every day? Like, how do you prove that? I don't get it.
I don't know. And it's just so disingenuous, because, even if you were like, even if you sent a photo every day, like, what man couldn't do that? And
exactly.
And and then to test themselves continuously for a year, a lot of it had to be their own testing. So you can actually, as Dr. Emma Hilton says from the UK says, like, you can actually take certain kinds of drugs that take your testosterone levels to castration. Like, you can take your testosterone down to castration level within 12 hours, take your test, and then after the test, your testosterone bounces back up to normal male levels again. So you could prove that you had 12 months in a row where you had tests where it showed your testosterone was down, but then the very next day it probably went back up again. And if you train with any kind of testosterone in your body as a male, by training, it boosts your testosterone further. So what I find incredible is that instead of saying, look, we tried this with the transsexuals. So in 2003, for the IOC should have just said no. In 2003, we thought we were just being fair and there were going to be so few. And we tried to do the transsexual policy, but that's not working. So let's go back to female only. Instead of saying that, they just basically opened the gate and said, well, come on in then. Oh my God. So that's what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with an International Olympic Committee full of men who just feel like maybe the women's section is just there to take care of whatever uncomfortable problems, because a transsexual male athlete is a male, and maybe the men don't want to deal with it in their section. So let's make the women just deal with it. And in the meantime, though, I feel like that's undermining the very Olympic brand. Like, who's going to watch the Olympics anymore, especially women's Olympics?
Fucking joke.
It's going to be a joke. People just turn the TV off. And
can't deny reality like that.
Yeah. Like, why? So I guess I feel like it's sad. It's sad on two levels, because female athletes, will be in sports where nobody's watching because nobody will take it seriously anymore. And then on the other hand, The Olympics themselves will be suffering, I think. In fact, why should I care about their brand? But we do, because we want still to have a authentic Olympic Games. So I mean, it's almost like we feel like we're fighting hard to protect the Olympics and the integrity, and they're not even trying.
That's a good point. What was the number you said that women can only get to, like, level 2 or number 2? And
Yeah,
what
two.
was that
It's
again?
about two. That's about the
That's
maximum.
like the best woman athlete in the globe. Is
Yeah,
that's the
just
most they've ever been able to reach, I guess.
well, within that, it's probably some get even higher, but it
What
would
was
be
that
never.
called again?
It's the 10 nanomoles, nmol, nmol per
Mm,
liter.
okay.
So there's a certain level that women sort of max out at,
Hmm.
unless you have a certain condition and intersex or whatever, and we can talk about that. But
Hmm.
there are, that most women are within a certain range, and it's much, much lower than 10 nanomoles per liter.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's see. I think you kind of covered that already. Can you go over the history with the policy changes of when they began to include trans athletes? I think you already said that. You said 2013.
Well, yeah. Well, the key dates are
Mm-hmm.
basically 2000, or basically 1996 is when they decided to stop gender testing. That was the last
Ah.
Olympics where they did the gender testing. And then 2003 was the year they brought in the transsexuals, allowing transsexuals, like people who undertook the surgery. And then 2015 consensus was then the final meeting where they said, well, let's just toss out the surgical requirement, just self ID, and we'll be all good with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Next one. Do trans athletes have to disclose their biological sex within US or worldwide? Like, is that a thing? Do they actually
Well,
they're seen as an actual woman within the Olympics, or I
see,
guess
that's where the confusion comes in, because if you're not going to gender test, then you're just going to take people's words for it. That's really no gatekeeping. And I mean, I feel like, in most cases is pretty blatantly obvious. And in fact, the sport groups like track and field, world athletics, when it came to, for example, Caster Semenya, who isn't transgender, Caster Semenya is different. Caster Semenya is a intersex condition, which we can talk about.
you can talk about it
But
now if you want. You don't have to wait because I think it's a
okay, so
great
I,
topic.
I let me talk about that, because that's the first thing that comes up. And the trans activists always talk about Caster Semenya as if
Mm,
Caster Semenya is their shining sort of example, which is not fair, because Caster Semenya grew up in South Africa thinking she was a girl, even though at the end it's turned out that you know she has a karyotype of XY, which is male. But that wasn't revealed very early on to anybody. So let me just back up and say, intersex, or differences in sexual development, the actual disorder is that even in a small, like, let's say the intersex group is 0.02% of the population, so really tiny fragment. And it doesn't mean they're in between. It means you can have intersex male or you can have intersex female. And all it means is that let's say you were a male, XY karyotype 46XY. It just means that the genital development somehow went sideways a little bit. And so the genitals are sort of ambiguous. They don't look like a full penis, but you just have sort of a developmental disorder, right? But you're still male fundamentally. And then there's people who are female fundamentally, XX chromosomes, but then maybe they, for whatever reason, had extra androgens in their body in utero or something, and so the clitoris looks a little bit longer or whatever. So there's like this ambiguous thing. So these people have very unique needs, and intersex is not, like, again, I wish it wouldn't be called that, because it's not inter anything. You're either a male that had a disorder or a female that had a disorder. And so because we're struggling with how to include those people in a sport, because a lot of top females, like a higher percentage than you'd expect from the population, are XX DSD, who have a little bit of more androgens than most women. So we have to look at that. But what happens is, because we're struggling with admitting intersex athletes in sport, the trans activists just say, well, there you go. Any man can identify as a woman, but it has nothing to do with a person who has just been born and raised normally as a male who suddenly identifies as a female. It has nothing to do with that. That person is actually male, right? And even with, unfortunately, with Semenya, I think World Athletics was just too scared back in 2010 to say, sorry, but you're a male and you shouldn't really be competing with the women. But they sort of soft pedaled it and said, well, we're not sure, it's ambiguous. So they let Semenya compete for years and years, which wasn't fair to the female athletes. But in the meantime, gained a big following, and people felt really sorry for Semenya, because what happened was, in the background, certain officials within World Track and Field leaked the fact that this might actually be a male. It's not exactly a female. So there was a lot of, instead of having a, really fair and sort of clear-cut call back in 2010, the ambiguous nature of, and the rumors kept swirling. And so it was really kind of, and then Semenya's private medical information leaked. And so it was in the way it was handled, I think, and in terms of being unfair to this individual. Yeah. And you have to understand that in poor countries of the world, somebody who's intersex, it might not be flagged right away when they were born, because they weren't getting the medical help they needed right then when they were born. Whereas in North America and Europe, if you are intersex, it's flagged immediately, and immediately either, like some sort of medical intervention happens so that it's much clearer that you're either the male or the female that your genetics implies, right? So it's not a surprise that it was somebody from a developing country that end up showing up and being intersex in the sport, because basically Semenya just was never examined until she became a world-class athlete. And then it became too awkward, and judge, people were worried about being called racist and all kinds of things, to just make a judgment call about whether that person should be in the women's category or not. So it got really a lot of handled poorly, to the point where Semenya's human rights were violated in many ways. But, by having Semenya in the women's race at the end of the day was also violating the human rights of a lot of the 800-meter women runners who were trying to compete with, what it turned out to be was a biological male. When they finally took it to the World Court for Sport, it finally emerged that, yes, indeed, Semenya was intersex, DSD 46XY. And so, we can deal with these really tricky issues, I think, privately in sport. But again, going back to your premise of who's to say who's a male or female, I think that needs to be still there. I think we still need to have a quick test, whether it's the buccal cells of the cheek. It doesn't have to be demeaning. I don't think it violates anybody's human rights. It protects the female category. And frankly, I haven't said this often, but now with the COVID testing and the COVID, like the methodology and the technology, all the COVID test is you're matching a piece of DNA from the virus to the strip, and you're just saying this piece of DNA is there. So obviously you have the virus. So how hard would it be then to then develop a quick sort of even some saliva on a piece of paper that says, oh, well, the Y chromosome is there. Like it can't be that hard. We have the technology. It's just a matter of now the way the debate is framed is, oh, well, that will be violating somebody's human right to really know they're male. You're not supposed to ask.
God, you mean they just want to live in a fantasy world and you just continue to deny reality? Obviously, you can't have reality in the fantasy realm, made up world. Yeah, I completely agree. Everything you're saying. My husband read this article about, it was ridiculous. It was some Utah lobby thing, whatever. I think I have the article somewhere. Not that it's like completely irrelevant. Who was it? Blake Hansen. It's just this like pity story.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. Everything they won't tell you about the transgender athletes, blah, blah, blah. Wasn't accepted in their life. this weird thing, just the stuff they were saying. I've never won a race. I've never taken a sponsorship or prize away from any other girl. But when I do, you better believe I earned it just like anyone else. Anyways, it's a dude in women's
Yeah.
sports. So my husband was wondering, where do trans activists get the following statement from? And this is from that article written by Blake.
Okay.
Quote, science has proven in every study done that after some time on hormone therapy, the athletic advantage once present disappears. Where do they get that from?
I don't know where they get it from because seriously, World Rugby did a survey, and I will even tell you the results. There, okay. So, of all the 12 studies in the history of of science in terms of measuring performance pre-transition and post-transition, there's only been 12, and Dr. Emma Hilton and Tommy Lundberg just in December 2020 released the results of their total literature review on that. And in virtually every study, even if it took 3 years, even if they had hormone therapy for up to 3 years, it did not change the advantage substantially. For example, lean mass. Okay, so men generally have lean mass, which is 45 or even 50% higher than women. But then when they remeasured the lean mass after a few years, a year to 3 years of hormone replacement therapy, where they reduced the testosterone levels, that percentage only dropped to, like, instead of having a 50% advantage, the men now have a 45% advantage. And strength. So you had like up to 60%. Men have 60% advantage in strength. And with hormone therapy, after a year or up to 3 years of reducing the testosterone, that only dropped 9%. So they went from maybe 60% advantage to 50%. And you can do that over and over again. The only thing that dropped to near female levels was hemoglobin in the blood. So when you reduce your testosterone, it takes a lot of the hemoglobin down to the female range. But interestingly, the running times still are better because even though you reduce the one molecule in the blood that carries the oxygen, because you have greater blood volume, and because men have greater blood volume, and their heart has, every time their heart beats, it strokes out a higher volume of blood, and they have more capillaries going to their muscles, there's still more oxygen being delivered to the tissue, even if the actual oxygen carrying molecule has, like been reduced. So in every way, male bodies who self-identify and even go through the therapy do not appreciably diminish their advantage. And so for these guys to show up and just say, science has proven, it hasn't proven anything. The only study that the IOC depended upon to have its 2015 policy put in place was a study done by transgender runner Joanna Harper, who is a radiologist, works in Oregon somewhere. And what Joanna did was, as a male runner, Joanna was a male, sort of in her 20s. I don't know. You want to say he or him, but
I say he. I do.
Okay,
I keep it
so he was running in his 20s. He had a certain time, and he noticed that when he was 50 and he became, he identified as a woman, the running times had dropped a lot. So he got this idea that he would go on Facebook and social media, because this was in the 2007-ish time when social media started, to really take off. And he looked around the web and for 3 years tried to find other males who had identified as women and who were runners, so distance runners. And he noticed, sort of from the world records, that, the male distance runners have a 10 to 15% better performances than the females. So it's actually in terms of distance running, it's not even as big an advantage as males as other things like weightlifting. But okay, let's go with that, 10 to 15%. So then he noticed that his levels dropped when he became Joanna Harper, but also older, running as an older athlete, had dropped the magical 10 to 15%. So he figured he'd look around and get like 7 or 8 other runners. He managed over 3 years to find 7 other runners that had established times in like pre-transition, and then had taken the hormones or whatever, and had now competed in the road racing or distance running post-transition. And so he asked them for their self-reported times before, after, which is a big, like, there's no control there. You're asking there's like sometimes up to 30 years difference, from 5 years to 30 years difference pre and post. So somebody's going to remember the time they ran when they were in their 20s, and they're going to remember the time they ran later. And then, all kinds of things that could have changed in their life. Their lifestyle could have changed. And of course, aging causes you to drop. So he then reports the study that shows that their times went down to, comparable to women of 50-year-old women, or their age grade women. And there was nothing controlled in that study. And then when I looked at it carefully, because I'm writing a book and I'm looking at it carefully, and what he did is, one of the runners, runner number 7 in his study, had actually done better after transition, a lot better. And he called that an outlier and just got rid of it. So the average,
he took
would have actually
the results. You mean?
Yeah, like he literally took the results that didn't conform to what the conclusion he wanted, and he dropped the one that was the outlier. And so the averages look like they dropped to the appropriate level, 10 to 15%. And even though he left out the one that would have negated that possibility. So then he published it and couldn't do it. It wasn't in a peer-reviewed journal at all, but the Olympic Committee right away just embraced the study, like, this study proves it all. And this person, Joanna Harper, was on the IOC medical committee, and they listened to this one transgender person. And that man,
they go, hey, come on.
They listened to the man, and that one male body sitting on the IOC Medical Commission 2015 caused the rules to change globally for all the women in the world at the Olympic Committee level. So just with this one stupid study that doesn't even show anything.
This is a whistleblower if I've ever heard one. God, I mean, that's wow.
So if you base your whole global policy on one study that's just garbage,
yeah,
and then once again, it's just like the survey that happened in 1996. You ask women their opinion, you get a bona fide opinion that women want you to keep doing the gatekeeping, but you ignore it and say, no, we don't want you to feel like humiliated. And then 2015, this person comes along, male person, that has this study as if they're like the gospel truth, which anybody could see, could debunk that study. And all of a sudden, this person's their cause celeb, and we're going to listen to this man, and his lived experience matters, and it shows that all of the advantages of being male are disappeared with testosterone reduction. So we're going to go with that. And they didn't, like, any sane person would look at that study and say, wait a minute, like, we need to do a lot more research before we're going to accept this. Plus, even Joanna Harper himself, like, just to his credit, said, I warn you, this is only valid for running. It doesn't say anything about other sports that require strength, require other things, right? Like speed. So even the person who's promoting this falsehood even warned against using it to, like, drawing conclusions about other sports. But the IOC was so eager to go with this. So to me, that just says that they were already predetermined in their brain that they're going to do this. Because that was such a terrible, like, there's no way you could rest your entire global policy on such a terrible an N of basically 7 or 8, like a study that has no peer review. And so, it's just, it's so insulting to women that this is how it happened. And, I have two things to say about that, Lindsay, but like the one thing I will say is that whenever women wanted to get something from the IOC, so we weren't allowed. Okay, so the first Olympic Games was not of the modern Olympics was 1896.
Mm-hmm.
That Olympics didn't have women in it at all, and so then they allowed women in a couple sports like basketball and golf, like just a few sports, tennis. I think it was tennis, golf, and maybe basketball in 1900. Women weren't allowed to run races or track and field until 1928. So the first Olympics was 1900, where women were in there, and it took until the LA Olympics in 1984 for women to, quote unquote, be allowed to run the marathon. So you look at that, the lobbying it took. It took us 84 years to be allowed for our safety to run the marathon. They always quote safety concerns, which I never
safety. What the? It's just
yeah, like women just couldn't. We might faint if we had to run longer than a mile or something. So, so when women want something, it takes us decades to achieve it, to actually get that provision in the International Olympic Committee. Yet one man goes in there on one meeting and gets what he wants in 2015. Like, if you're going to allow a male body into female sports, at the very least, you need to turn over every possible stone of evidence to make sure that that person's not going to have a competitive advantage. And they did the exact opposite. So women's experience in the Olympic Games is we have to lobby, push hard, try everything we can to get a little bit of an advance, like getting more towards equity in terms of the number of events. Like I would call it parity. So the number of events that men can do, women should be able to do. So like women weren't allowed to do ski jumping, for example, till, just in fact, I don't know if they still do. I think they do now, but there's certain things like just in bobsled, there's just certain things where like women can't have the 4-man or something. They have to have the 2-man bobsled only. And like, they're always sort of putting in these restrictions that women don't get to do all the things that men can do in the Olympics. But when a man wants something, he gets it like with a snap of a finger. And then the other thing I was going to say is this is a betrayal because Alice Milat from France, and about like right during World War I, had said like, you need to get women in the Olympics and like in races and track and field. And the Olympic Committee kept saying, no. So in 1922, she organized the International Federation of Women's Sports, and we had our own Women's Olympics. So we had our own Women's Olympics in 1922, 1926, 1930, and 1934. Wow. And because we were having our own Olympics, and you know what? We were filling stadiums. So we had women's only Olympics. We had stadiums full of people watching, and the Olympic Committee got mad that they weren't in control of that. So because we were doing so successfully on our own without them, that's what caused them to accept us in 1928 into the Olympics in the first place in track and field.
So they can control.
So they could control the whole thing, right? And call it all the big Olympic. So the deal they made with Alice, with the Women's Federation, was to actually give us respect and equal treatment in the Olympics. And so as soon as women agreed to go into the Olympic Games, right away, boom, men got to do like 24 events and women could only do 5. So they only let us still do 5 different running races in the event. So right away it was like, oh, well, we'll take you under our umbrella, but you're not going to, have the same status as men. So here we come.
How many women events were in the Women Olympics? I'm curious. So it went from like an X number to like 5 in the Men's Olympics, basically.
Yeah, well, we did all of them. Like we did like 20 or more. I think it was like up to 20 different events that women could do when they were just doing the women's only Olympics. Yeah. But then when we got folded into the men's Olympic movement, then we had to get by and just be happy with 5. And then it went up from there. So finally, the irony is this is what I talk about in my book. By 2015, finally, the women in track and field, for example, had reached parity. There's just one event, the decathlon, Bruce Jenner's event, ironically. But the decathlon is the one event that we don't all still get to do. It's heptathlon. So instead of doing 10 events in the decathlon, the women do 7 events in the heptathlon. So basically, we're still just kind of not quite decathletes. So we're asking, why? Like, anyway, the point is, the year that we get almost exact parity with men, 2015, well, 2016 in Rio, we were at almost a perfect parity in terms of the number of events. That's the year they decide men should be allowed to be in women's sports.
How convenient.
So, I don't know if it was just by, obviously by mistake or like
There's
just
no coincidences in my world.
Coincidence. So my point is, I don't know where we're going from here. What happens next with the Olympic Games? If they aren't going to course correct very quickly, maybe at some point we're just going to have to go back to the women's only Olympics and just do our own thing.
Yeah. I mean, history repeats itself.
Exactly 100 years later.
Wow. Hurrah. Say we don't need them anyways. I mean, we didn't need them back then. So, all right, we get the hint. Bye.
Well, maybe we could give women better, like the only way you could do it, in my opinion, is I believe in competition. The only way we could get women to move over to a women's only international federation or Olympics for women is by offering better prize money. So if we offered a really good prize money for female athletes, I think a lot of them would come over.
Oh, we'd be called bigots and transphobes.
Well, but at that stage, then we could set our own rules about gatekeeping.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Great information. Holy crap. I had no idea we even had our own Olympics. I don't even know half the history with all this stuff.
Well, that's why I'm here, because I feel like there's so much of this is sort of in the sort of cloudy in people's minds, like why and where is this coming from? And like, I think we just need to look very clearly, like even somebody like Joe Rogan, who is completely in favor of women only sport and female only sport. He even talks about how gross the Olympics is in terms of it's basically slave labor. Like the athletes compete and they're still eating Kraft dinner and, mac and cheese. And meanwhile, the head honchos of the Olympics are billionaires. Like they're just getting money hand over fist from corporations like Procter and Gamble and all these other companies who are, supporting them to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And the athletes just walk away with, oh, yay, I have a gold medal. And then you never hear from them again. They're poor, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have, the athletes themselves are not shareholders in this process. And maybe there's a chance now for a complete rethink about how, if they're going to work hard, maybe we also have to give them the share of the profits of what happens there.
Yeah, you would think. Absolutely.
Right, I mean, this is a dream interview because you're allowing me to say things like using the COVID technology and
whatever you want. This is why I do my podcast. It's not about
awesome.
me.
Like the truth is that whole thing I told you about just now, that's actually that story about the history and women's sport. It's actually pinned to my it's pinned to my Twitter. Like it's my tweet. That's a huge, 24 tweets in a row. And I talked about
I saw that,
the progress just of and so it somewhere in the middle there, it shows I even got a clip of the 1922 women's, one of the competitions in Monaco leading up to it. So it was funny, but it was, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. What's your book about and when's that coming out? Tell me.
Yeah. So, I was approached in June of 2020 to maybe I should think about writing a book, and it's a company up here, a publisher and Canadian publisher, Rebel Media. The only one, of course, everybody's going to say, oh, right wing, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? The fact is, it's the only one that would ever ask me to do such a thing and give me a little bit of not financial support, but just logistical support to write it. And so I'm calling this book, it's finished now. It's going to be published any day now. The book's title is Unsporting: How Trans Activism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport. And I wrote it with Barbara Kay.
Amazing. Oh, that's epic. What a great title. Very, very true.
Yeah. So the table of contents, basically basically I start with the title of chapter 1 is Fracture Her Skull. So I talk about Fallon Fox and about so I start out with some of the absurdities that we are seeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I talk about the next chapter is Ethical Mirage, which is my own story where I felt like I was eliminated from the Olympic team because essentially a lot of my teammates were doping and I wasn't good enough because I wasn't willing to dope. So basically I missed my chance to the Olympics because of a lot of doping was still going on. And even though we were testing, so I felt like, I thought that was maybe the last of the injustices I would see. And then I went on to become a coach and then all of a sudden having this show up, exactly 30 years after I didn't make the Olympic team and just like here we go again. So
Yeah.
I just described that feeling and what it's like and just the whole struggle with trying to think about the injustice of it. And then I go into chapter 3 is Zuby Strikes Gold. I talk about Zuby. I don't know if you remember Zuby's tweet about the deadlift record. And then just going into more about the males and just who are we talking about here and just talking about like some of the legal things that are happening in the States and the Connecticut girls and just looking at finishing that chapter with Rachel McKinnon, the cyclist. And then chapter 4 is actually a little bit deeper dive into the Rachel McKinnon thing, because Rachel McKinnon is a professor and has it's been given a lot of really a platform to be the spokesperson. And I end that chapter with the idea that's like, have you ever heard the actual McKinnon's PhD thesis? Did you hear the title for that thesis?
Please do.
Okay. Tell. The title of the thesis is Reasonable Assertions on Norms of Assertion and Why You Don't Need to Know What You're Talking About. That's literally the thesis. Why you don't need to know what you're talking about when you're making an argument. Like it's just so bizarre. It's almost like a parody. Like I think the thesis is basically the argument that McKinnon makes in his thesis is basically you can say something that's not true. Like you can tell a lie.
Oh my God.
But you can actually make it come true by changing the context of that lie. So basically you can say
he's not lying, Jesus.
Yeah. What? See, like so
he's showing you all of his cards. Look at me. Proud of
it. But the funny thing is in May of 2020, McKinnon himself got a reprimand from the department in South Carolina in Charleston, from the university department because the chair of the department literally, I can read a little sentence here. It says like, you have thus far evaded what might seem like theoretically the most important question. What is the normative basis for the distinction between men and women's sports? If you're saying there's no difference between men and women, why do we have women's sport in the first place? You have to explain that. You can't identify into a women's sport and then act like that section shouldn't even be there. Like it doesn't even make any sense, right? So anyway, so we talk about that a little bit, and then I go on and talk about the inverse, like when women are transitioning to male or like to men. So females trying to transition to men. In Canada, it's weird what's happening is that we have athletes who are identifying as men, like female athletes are identifying as men, but magically they get to stay in the female section because it increases their chance of winning. Well, that's fine. We can accept female athletes in female sports. But when it's a trans person who's of the other sex, when it's male to female, somehow they're also allowed to come into female sports. So whether you're M to F or F to M, you end up in female sports. So it's a big racket. So it ends up being,
it winds up on our shoulders, everything.
Every time it ends up on our shoulders. And of course, just magically, because when you're in that section, you have a better chance of winning. So my solution at the end of the book is going to say, we should have the men as like men's section should be the open section and women and females should be restricted to female only, because that's the only way to have it where you have people self-identifying into a category without having a competitive advantage. So the only way to make it fair is to have an open and a female, right? If you're going to have a binary system. So what they're treating in Canada, they're treating it in exactly the opposite. The women's section is the take all.
Yeah.
We're the bin that takes all.
Yeah.
And then the men are the ones that have, the male athletes have their exclusive area, right? So it's exactly the opposite of what it should be. Mm-hmm. So I just go through, of course, like,
you don't have to go all over it. I don't think you're going to.
No, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying that I go into the Olympic thing that I just described. And then I talk about the World Rugby, because World Rugby did an amazing thing in 2020 to do a big review, which I talked about how you could see that the transition, like the hormones, do not take away the advantage. And and then my last chapter, I had to pull it back from the publisher because I wanted to put in a chapter on Biden's executive order. So I did the last chapter 12 is on Biden's executive order. So so it's back at the publisher, and we're going to get it to come out, as soon as we can.
Amazing. Is that going to be available like on, I shouldn't even support Amazon. Never mind, scratch that.
Well, I think what it is the publishing company, I would suspect, Rebel Media will probably just sell it directly from their from their company instead of trying to go through Amazon or something. I suppose it's going to be, it's completely blocked like the minute it's going to be listed.
Yeah, just kidding. With
I don't know. I can't speak for the publisher, though. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Yeah. But I would.
It's the better thing to do, anyways. We don't need to support that.
I would suspect that any day now the cover will be out, and for like pre-sales. So keep your fingers crossed. Epic. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, let's go on with more questions here. How do you feel about the increasing number of states that are legislating to protect women and girls' sports? Legislating to protect, they are? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. So let me just explain really quickly, because Kara Dansky has done a good job of explaining what
she says. Hi, by the way.
Hi, Kara. She's done a good job of explaining on different programs. The fact that just because a president has an executive order doesn't mean it changes the law. What it really does is it changes the interpretation in the government departments. So what Biden is asking people to do on his very first day in office, he's saying to all federal agencies that whenever you see the word sex in your legislation or in a policy, you need to read, instead of reading sex, like biological sex, you need to read gender identity. So basically, even if it came to something like, for example, in Canada, we have coaches have a code of conduct, which is you can't have sexual assault or sexual violence. Well, if you replace that with gender identity, what does gender identity violence mean? What does gender identity assault mean? That means that they can interpret even somebody's words to mean that you're breaking that law, right? So what the states are doing is basically saying, "Nuh-uh, we run our own lives. We're going to have our own bill where we protect our girls on the ground in each state." And so far, there's been up to 24 states that have said, no. We're going to interpret Title IX the way it should be interpreted, that it should be female-only sports. And what they're saying is, to me, looking at it from afar, it looks like the states are telling Biden, no, you're the one breaking the law. We aren't.
Yeah.
So if that's the way they're saying, if that's what they're actually doing, then you and I both know it's going to end up in the Supreme Court. Somebody's going to do another challenge, and the Supreme Court's going to have to rule, because if the federal government would suddenly not do the $500 million transfer to Montana, for example, the education transfer payment. So they basically, you don't get your grant because you're not allowing males to compete according to gender identity or something in your school system, right?
Like if said, or they always do the threatening money thing.
They could actually, it could cause, Kara said this at one point, that it could actually cause, she just used the state of Montana as an example, but I think it was 454, some sort of million, 400 level or 500 million level of money that might be withheld if they don't abide by the dictates of the policy and that executive order. But the thing is, if that would happen, I think Montana could immediately, and why wouldn't they, take it to the Supreme Court and say, this is not right. We are complying with the law. We are in compliance. It's the executive order that's not in compliance. So I don't see how it's going to not be, how there's not going to be a Supreme Court challenge. And, people might be negative because the Bostock decision about Title VII said, you can't discriminate on the basis of gender identity with respect to employment. But they did say in that ruling that it wouldn't be the same for other things like Title IX. So I'm not convinced that if it went back to the Supreme Court for Title IX ruling, I'm not convinced that the Biden administration would win that one. And so I'm really looking forward to it. And I have a lot of hope that if more and more states join the bandwagon and say, listen, you can say that all you want on your executive order, but we're going to do our own thing on the ground. I think it's just a beautiful example of why the United States is a great country, because states, it's a federation of states, and each state is a union of states, and each state still is responsible for themselves. And I think it's time for the states to assert themselves. And I love it. I love the fact that these states are standing up and saying, this far, no further, because we see that you've basically lost the plot.
Yeah, totally.
So I think it's great. I'm really happy. I'm so excited. And even if, like in New Mexico last week, it was sort of died in committee, I was.
That's actually the next question. Someone said,
yeah,
what are the next steps for New Mexico and women's sports? What can we do?
I think you can just, if people are on the ground in New Mexico, propose a new bill, put it back on the table, because this one, the one that was just overruled this past week, I think people should know that what happened was almost everybody on that committee had a family member who was trans. And so they were taking the sports issue as a direct assault on their family or something, which it shouldn't be that personal. Like,
no,
just because we want sport to be female only doesn't mean we don't want kids to participate in activities at school. That is the farthest thing from the truth. And that's how it keeps being framed. It's being framed like, if you don't take a young man into a girl's sports team, it's all over. They don't get to do anything.
They don't say that. They make it very clear that they say trans girl or trans woman to keep using the woman, trans woman in women's sports. It's like, it's not a woman though. Stop using this language. It's so dangerous. And this is also obviously manipulation of the language to have people fall for this, because I just feel like people know the word woman much more than the word transgender. So they just kind of hone in on woman. Well, that's not fair for that woman. It's just,
well, as you probably saw on Twitter, I made a chart of all the comments made in that committee, and they, it's gotten to the point where the activists basically say, if you bring up woman, you bring up biology, you bring up anything, it's hateful. So we're not allowed to even say what biology the reality is. Yeah, it's bigotry. So basically, but what I don't like also is a lot of the conservative articles is banning trans from sport. No, we're not. Exactly. We're not banning anybody. Yeah. We're just saying you have every right. If you're a male and identify as a female, you have every right to compete with the boys. Yeah. I mean, we're not banning you from anything. We're just saying sports is still divided on the basis of biological sex, and you can identify. In fact, I would actually make the argument that it doesn't help trans, let's call it trans, even if we said trans girls, but males who identify as trans, it doesn't help them to be in girl sport. I'll tell you why. Because those Connecticut boys, the first two might feel special and get a lot of attention. But as more and more boys, like, all it's going to take is another year or two, more boys see the attention they get. Now they join. Yeah. So now they self-identify as female or women, to the point where the entire race is all males, and they can't, then they don't feel affirmed anymore. They're not going to feel affirmed. Like, the whole point is they're trying to feel affirmed. So if it's all male, then nobody feels affirmed. And then they'll walk away, because it's very clear to me the only interest they have in putting the opposite sex and self-identifying into the women's sport is because they want to feel loved and accepted and affirmed for their new identity. So they're using sport as identity therapy instead of just wanting to compete like that. So what I would say is, what's more powerful than that is to be presenting as a woman, but running in a men's race. Like, you would literally stand out. You would literally say, like, I am male. And a lot of what I love about my friends on Twitter who are trans, like Miani Bagger from Australia, who they are transsexual, but they're saying, look, no, I'm male. I understand I'm male. But I just, I wanted to identify as a woman. So if you're honest, they can say, look, I've chosen to identify as a woman, but I'm going to go in the men's race. And you could actually still get way more attention, because
Yeah.
if people start asking, what's that woman doing in a man's race? They could say, well, I'm a trans woman. Well, fine. Yeah. I mean, and then you are special. But you're not going to be special after the first or second generation in a women's competition, because you'll never be affirmed. Everybody will lose interest and walk away.
Yeah. I think half of it is affirmation, but I really think it's just outright cheaters. I found this open door to just do this and cheat.
I don't know.
I mean, it's flat out, to me, it's just flat out cheating.
Yeah.
Obviously I think it is some affirming their.
I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think because in that committee meeting, I heard a lot about they're not going to be loved. They're going to be excluded. That's not what this is about. It's not what this is about. It's not sport. Oh, listen, let me tell you this. Sport is the one area in life where you hear no a lot. No, you didn't make the team. No, you didn't make team captain. No, you lost that competition. No. Sport is, if you want affirmation, sport is the one area where you shouldn't even be, because sport is more devastating than.
Oh yeah, it's rough.
Oh, it's rough. And so to go into sport, and I think a lot of the activists, I don't think they've watched sport in their whole lives. They're just using sport now as their next platform to try to sort of spread their message. And I get that feeling distinctly that they're just using it as sort of a platform to say, look, this is, if we can identify into anything we want. But you know what? The fact is that for a kid to actually identify and do all that and try to, like, sport is the wrong venue for, I would call it psychosocial therapy. It's not, sport is not your psychosocial therapy session. Sport is where you compete and it's brutal.
Yeah.
So stop using it for your whatever. It's not therapy. It's actually fun. But you know what? You have intramurals, you have orienteering, you have pickup,
actual therapy.
You have but you have so many other things that are just fun community. Yeah. Like you can do a pickup game of ultimate frisbee. It's so much fun. Men and women compete together all the time in frisbee.
Oh yeah.
And so there's so many areas where you can be accepted. It doesn't matter what your gender is or your sex or whatever. You just pick up this game. Everybody has a good time. Why are you picking sports where it's like the prizes and the really serious competition?
Because men want it all. They don't care.
I guess, like, it's just, to me,
psychopathy. Like,
so I have learned my lesson. Like the New Mexico thing really opened my eyes. And what I feel like we need to do is to really make it clear that no matter whether you have a family member involved in this is about fairness to the girls and their families. It's about the place of sport in society and the types of, like, the realm of sport and why it's so unique compared to doing your intramurals or your lunchtime pickup game. We're not saying they can't play that. Yeah. Like, even in track and field, when we compete very seriously as males and females. But you know what? My entire track and field life, males and females always train together. We always train together. It's very inclusive. Like, I remember my coach saying, okay, me, Linda Blade, and like one other girl, and then two guys had to run this hill sprint. So my coach would send us off, give us like a 10-yard or 20-yard head start, and the boys would chase us down. And that was, the incentive was they had to try to catch up to us, and we had to try to make it so they'd never catch up to us. So there were like so much fun, like where we would adapt to the differences between the two sexes, but we were still running against each other, but it was just like for fun in a training environment. And so we did all our drills together. We hung out together. So there's not exclusion there. Even if they were on the men's team, they could hang out with the girls. They could hang out, like, maybe not the locker rooms, but they could actually, like, they could hang out and they could be fun. Like, they could have fun. But when it comes to actual competition, there has to be rules of the game, or it doesn't even qualify as sports anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're not getting that. Like, this committee was just so focused on the fact that They were so convinced that we wanted to do harm to the poor trans kids. That's just not what this is about.
No, not at all. I know they keep framing it in these very disingenuous ways, as
Yeah.
usual. It's exhausting. Next question is ask her to talk about the disingenuous language around this, as if, quote, trans are not included. Actually, you just said this, or
I
being
did say
offered,
that.
yeah, or being offered fair opportunity to compete. I think not enough people are noticing the language of inclusion actually excludes women and girls.
Yeah. So that was what one of my videos that the one, actually that's the one you talked about.
Yeah,
So basically what
awesome.
I was just saying was, um, when you make when you use the word inclusion and you actually have everybody in a big category, if you think about ages, so let's say you had
Mm,
a massive race, like a road running race where it was all ages, so kids and adults. And you said, well, we're going to be maximally inclusive and not worry about what age you are. Of course, the mature adult person would win, and then all the little kids would lose. And why would they ever want to run that race? Because
yeah.
it's by having layers, like stratification, where you have layers and categories, and like in boxing you have weight levels and weight
Mm-hmm.
divisions, and when you have layers, people within those levels have a better chance of winning. That's why we separate sports into different categories. And so when they say to be inclusive, we should have like no difference between men and women, like, basically anybody can just self-identify into whatever, you're basically saying we're just one big category, males and females together, which means the men will always win and the women won't win at all. So then the women will just walk away, and I mean, sport isn't for them then. So
Exactly.
really my point was, when you use the word inclusion in that way, you're actually excluding people. So your language becomes completely like inverted, right? Inside out,
Mm-hmm.
right? So basically that's kind of my key point with that. And
Good
I
point.
just I just find this whole thing hilarious, because everything they say, I had a chart here somewhere where, oh yeah. So I'm going to read you some words and the
Yes,
inverted
please. Let's
language.
go.
Okay,
Woohoo.
here. So what the term is, so I'm going to give you the woke term, and then I'm going to give you what it actually means. So gender means anything but never biological sex. Inclusion means exclusion of female persons, their opinions, their rights, their placement on podiums and their teams. Meaningful competition means loss of meaning in women's sports because male athletes are now allowed to participate. Misgendering is actually telling the truth about one's gender and sex. Safety means danger, especially in contact sports where the probability of serious injury to a female athlete is what happened in World Rugby. This is their conclusion. The serious injury to female athletes will increase by 20 to 30% if you include a male athlete. Tolerance, when woke says tolerance, it means intolerance to any female person's opinion about her sex-based rights to fair play and safety. When you say woke, it means actually that you're myopic. You basically don't see it. Sports leaders completely ignore the concerns of female athletes. So they're not woke. They're actually closing their minds to what female athletes need. And when you say woman, it actually means anybody of any sex, gender, or creed, and it's wide open. So everything they say, in fact, in the New Mexico thing, I'll tell you something. That time when last week,
I haven't heard about this, by the way. The
what?
whole anything, the New Mexico anything.
Okay,
You
so then
posted it.
I was basically a witness for the bill,
Hmm.
Protect Women's Sports bill in New Mexico this past Thursday. And so basically, if you go back to my timeline on Twitter, just
Hmm.
with like 2 days ago or a day ago, I just listed all the comments made on that sheet. Like there was a big bunch of comments made by the people who were opposing the bill, who
Hmm.
were thinking we were attacking their poor trans kids. And the comments were unbelievable. And one of the things that I said, and I obviously I have to watch how I frame this the next time, but all I said was, in my testimony, I said, my point was biology matters. Okay. So biology matters. And so just like you wouldn't tell a farmer that a bull will become a milking cow by thinking a few key thoughts, you won't convince me, Coach Blade, that some young person thinking some woke thoughts are going to, or like I didn't say woke, but just some self ID thoughts are going to change their biological sex from male to female.
I say
So
don't
that
censor yourself if that was like a problem. I'm like,
no, no. I'm
if
going to tell you
people
what
were
they said.
outraged, I'm
I'll
like,
tell
that's
you
a
what they
good
said.
thing. Yeah.
It's a good thing, but they said, and part of their response to that was they were that we were comparing their children to to farm animals.
They always reach and they pick cherry pick. They're so I gotta give it to them. They're pretty imaginative. Not that one, but some of the twisted mental gymnastics is pretty clever at times. I'm like,
Yeah,
wow, what a reach
yeah.
that is. Come on,
Oh, right. So all the
stop.
point I was making was
Oh,
that
God.
any biological creature isn't going to change their fundamental nature by thinking something. And yet, oh no, like no, now you're saying we're farm animals. Are you
Not
kidding
the
me?
point. Trying to distract from the
So we're
actual
all
point.
part of kingdom Animalia. I mean, that's the whole point. Like
Yeah.
we're all animals. Fundamentally, you and I are mammals, right? Like yes, we have an advanced, intellect and all that, but fundamentally, we still male or female. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
how biology works. And
Yeah.
frankly, after you were all dead and gone, biology will just continue. Biology just shrugs at us. Like this is so ridiculous.
Yeah. That's such a great.
We're
Yeah.
just going to move on. Like biology just says, okay, well, whatever. 2021 guys are ridiculous. Like by 2050, there's still going to be a male and a female having sex, having a baby. Like nothing's going to
Fleshy
change.
reality remains like no matter
So,
what.
we can be all upset because it does affect our lives right now. But frankly, biology is just going to win the day. And so, you know what I say? All these white male billionaires who are trying to change everybody's minds, the joke is on them because they're going to spend all their billions of dollars trying to change the reality. And at the
Ruin
end,
people's lives.
all their billions that they've spent for what? Biology just shrugs its shoulders and carries on. Like they're not going to change any damn thing. So I don't know
Yeah.
what they're trying to do.
Brainwash the globe,
Well,
and I believe
temporarily,
this is.
I
I know.
guess.
I know it exactly what you're saying, and I believe that too. Where I feel like it really is inevitable. It's gonna, sandcastles are gonna come crumbling down,
Of course.
um, and
So I
fleshy
have a great
reality.
deal of positive, like
Hmm.
I have a lot of hope and a lot of faith that
Hmm.
we can go through this crazy time.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're going to look back and say, that was a thing. Wasn't that weird?
Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah, I mean, look at how much we've already overcome in the history of the world in the last 100 years. That's crazy stuff already.
I just wish
So
they'd
that gives
spend
me
their
hope.
billions on more productive things, is all I'm saying. Maybe world
Oh,
hunger.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
come on.
anything else but that. Yeah, something
Yeah,
that
right?
actually is founded in reality, because none of this
Exactly.
shit is. Because you can't transition to the other sex. It's
And
not
it's just
gender.
causing trouble in society for no
Yeah,
reason at all. Why?
yeah,
Just to support their little personal sort of ideology. I don't know. It's weird.
yeah. 100%. Amy says, "Please give her my love and respect." And I said, Kara
Aw.
said hi, and then someone else said, "I don't have a question, but I would like her to know that I appreciate all that she does and her bravery in doing so."
Aw. That's awesome.
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you have a whole knowledge full of, your brain is fantastic. That was really a dumb
It's
way to say it, but I'm
full.
excited for your book.
It's full.
100%.
It's too full. It's
Yes.
blowing my brain. I've had to look up too many different things.
All of us have, honestly. As soon as you
Yeah.
become aware of all this, I've never had to research more about what is sex, what is gender,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a lot of research. It really is, and I think that's probably why a lot of people don't understand it. Is just you have to read a lot, and really understand. I feel like the what it's been like for women,
Yeah.
since the beginning of time. I think that's been a huge part of it that
Yeah.
people are just not aware of. Even myself, I had no clue. I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, me too. I'm still learning.
yeah,
And the
we all
truth
are.
is, I took those notes on the New Mexico meeting last Thursday because I sincerely, like, I want to hear one good reason for their ideology, like something I haven't heard that
Yeah,
maybe I'm missing something.
right.
Maybe there's just something I'm not getting, right? And I'm listening. And I took all those notes because I was hoping for one gem of an idea that would help
I
maybe
know.
resolve this thing or help me understand why you think that it would be in any way fair to self-identify a male into female sports. And all I hear is gaslighting. I hear people turning words in like what my words are, and yeah, now I'm calling them farm animals. Now, we're so hateful. A person said, don't mention, even the very fact that you mentioned biology is hateful.
Oh Lord.
Like
How
the
much more
insanity
has
of it is, but you know what? Turns out that the chair of the committee, her nephew, was trans and committed suicide a couple of years ago, and I feel bad. Like I feel so bad for that person. What does sports have to do with that?
Yeah.
Why are we using that experience as like somehow?
Because it's empathy. They're manipulating your emotions to get you to follow suit and feel sorry for.
Yeah, but and it's I do honestly do feel sorry, but
Yeah.
you don't fix somebody's, again, it's has a completely different
Yeah.
um solution,
Yeah.
and why would you be doing this, like using sport sort of as your platform to be sort of saying, well, that's the reason a lot more children are going to be going down this route, and or some silly thing. Like I don't know why we would even bring that up as in the context of a sport debate.
Yeah, they're acting like this has been historically a thing that we've excluded them from sports, like all of a sudden. Like
Yeah.
every time they
uh,
bring it up, it's like, oh, it seems like they've been doing this with this for like I don't know, years. I'm like, what?
but I think what it is the sports thing, because it's so clear, like
Mm,
the distinctions.
yeah.
I think sport has become a proxy for the larger debate. And
Mm,
even Rachel
mm-hmm.
McKinnon says that. So instead of, they don't really care about sport, they're just saying you're using sport now to be hateful towards trans people. That's not what we're doing at all. We're
Being hateful towards
defending sports.
women. Let's be
We're
correct here.
defending sports,
Yeah.
and we're trying to preserve sport for females. And we're not we're this
Mm,
has nothing to do with
yes.
some assumption that somehow we all hate like trans people. We don't. We
It's not
want
about
them.
trans people have nothing to do with this really. It's about the rights for women and girls, period. That's
Yeah,
it.
I mean, that's been the part
That's why
that's
I'm
kind of
here.
painful personally to me, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that um I mean, my children, my husband can tell you, I'm not a hateful person. I spend my whole life trying to coach athletes to be better.
Yeah.
I love my children, my husband. I mean, I don't have a hate in my heart. It's not
Yeah.
what this is about at all. In
No.
fact, the fact that somebody would insist on putting a male body and put female athletes at risk, by having like Hannah Mounsey, who's the Australian who goes into like rugby
The
and
most
handball and contact.
bro of bros.
Yeah,
God.
like huge body, like just ready to just
Burly like
crush.
neck. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just so male.
You know what Hannah said is, he said, the fact that we object to his presence as a large body is sending women, it's fat shaming women, and we're telling women who are big, fat,
What?
that
Shut up.
that
Oh my
large women
god.
aren't allowed in sports. And I'm like, what? You really said that? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. It's just like turning every single thing into some negative, like we're demeaning somebody.
Such a
And yet
lie.
there are the ones, it's like the opposite list I just read to you. There are the
Mm-hmm.
ones who are
Mm-hmm.
literally, like, you talk about farm animals, right? What's more like treating women like farm animals than calling them gestators and egg producers and
Ooh. Good point.
and lactating machines and things like that?
Yeah.
I mean, everything they say that we're doing, they are the ones doing this.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. I've noticed that everything, yeah, literally everything, and even the terminology and whatnot that's why I'm like, this is the biggest projection movement ever.
Yes,
Like everything they say about us is literally what they are doing. I'm like,
that's right.
what's so fucked up because people don't really look beyond tweets or headlines and they really
Yeah.
believe it.
Yeah, but
It's the
listen to
biggest
them. Like,
lie.
I have come to the conclusion that I listen carefully,
Mm-hmm.
because when they accuse our side of doing something, then they're telling me that's exactly what they're doing.
Yes, yes, I've noticed that. It's everywhere. Yes, yep. It's very
Isn't it
amusing.
amazing? Like, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. They can't even. I feel like it's just reality. Finding a way to show it's still there. Like in a sense,
Yeah.
you can't hide it. Like even they are saying it and showing their cards. I keep saying that, but it's so true.
Yeah. And so I just feel like they think that we're stupid little creatures who
Yeah,
can't see the difference.
yeah, Nope.
And
We are done with that. We're not
we're
having it.
done. We're so done with this. I hope they understand. We are done. Like,
And
there's
we're
no
being
amount of
nice too.
bullying.
It's not about this. We're over being nice. It's not about. I'm not saying we're sitting here being mean, but this whole like,
No.
oh, just be nice. Gosh, it's like, no, we're done with that. Like, you need to listen.
Yeah. And so
Um,
when they say that, then I turn around and just copy, because now it's my turn to tell them, you be nice, because that's exactly what we should do. I mean, it's just complete mirror image. You know, in molecular genetics, you have this thing called chirality, where it's just like your right hand, your left hand, you put them together, they're kind of like opposite mirror images.
mm-hmm.
So it's just a chiral, it's just such a chiral experience. Like everything they're saying, it's like, it's what they're doing. And we can reflect right back at them that they're doing the exact same thing. They're being hateful to us.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so, nobody has like the monopoly on virtue, you know? And, but yet people like leaders in sport are being just way too afraid to call that out. And I don't know why.
It's a great question. Because people are just, I think, terrified of being called names or it's a whole lot of cowards, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the guys that I always have to deal with in terms of sport policy, I mean,
Mm.
they're really afraid. They're really afraid. And I don't understand where, like, I don't understand. I don't understand where that comes from, because it's our job to set up our policy. It's our job. And it's because we've not had good leaders in the sports realm. Like coaches are just willing to go along with the lie instead of putting their foot down and saying, sorry, not today, right? No, you can't make this team, because they do that to everybody else. Why can't they just say no?
Such a good question, really.
So yeah, so what I'm saying is, my hope is that with the book and with the women's movement, and
Yeah.
like with more of us talking out, and I'm so happy that the women are marching on Washington. I'm so
Great.
sad I can't be there, but with COVID, like crossing the border is
Yeah.
hard.
Oh, yeah.
But I was there actually for the rally, when it was the Bostock decision, like for
Mm.
like that was October of 2019. I went to Washington, and I was there with Save Women's Sports, and I mean, it was just amazing. Karadansky also organized that one with Wolf,
Awesome.
and it was just so amazing, and such amazing women. Natasha Chart, everybody was there. It was just amazing. And so I wish you guys, ladies, well. Are you going to go over there?
Possibly. I haven't
Yeah.
announced it just because.
Yeah. Fair, fair. So, I mean, I
However.
just feel like, even if it happens, a lot of us are there, like in spirit, virtually.
Oh, yeah.
I feel
100%.
like I feel like the march and just the whole momentum. I feel like there's no turning back the clock on this. Like, we're done. We're done. We can't have this. We can't have it happening.
Can't silence us. Not happening.
Yeah.
Well, if there's anything else you wanted to address or bring up, you can absolutely do it now.
Well,
But
I think we pretty much rounded the
yeah,
corner on it. You know, uh, I just really appreciate being able to talk to you, Lindsay. I mean,
my pleasure.
I've listened to others. I mean, I think I've seen you on YouTube, right? You're on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so I just thank you for your continued advocacy, because your lack of fear and speaking out is great. And I wish you the best of
Thank you
luck and
so much.
everything in your
You too.
podcast and your projects, because I'm sure you have other projects going on. And like really, really, really thank you for supporting female athletes, because
My
yeah,
pleasure.
we're
I've done
just at
sports my entire life. Cheerleading. I mean, yes, it's a
really.
sport.
No, it is a
Baseball.
sport.
Excuse me,
Cheerleading's
softball.
amazing.
It's tough. Yeah, that wasn't
Yeah,
our practices. Swimming, swim team for years.
really.
The only one I'm trying to think. Basketball.
Yeah,
I don't know. Sports is very, very important. And there's a very clear. It's just this is so ridiculous. Just the denial of the facts and reality of
yeah,
men are just stronger, and it's
yeah.
like people are like, oh, that's so sexist, and like, oh, you're saying that women can't do what men can do. I'm like, no, not at all. But there's an absolute unbelievable advantage that men have, and
Hmm.
I just, I've seen the video of I think it was Connecticut, whatever those two
Yeah.
African American males running, and
Yeah.
I'm like, why is no one standing up going, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
What is this?
So
No,
see, that's my
no.
point.
How does
That's
everyone?
my
There's like a whole like a stands of people sitting there. I mean, obviously, I was like, maybe people couldn't tell it was a guy from like the stands, but
yeah.
or
But
I
that
would
was
just
my
be
whole
like, what
point.
is this?
My whole
No.
point is the officials and the school division who allowed them to set up their starting blocks on that starting line. Like
Yeah.
that's it's not up to the girls really to argue when it comes time for that race. It's okay. People say the girls should just sit down and not compete, but might be their only chance to ever do a race like that. So I think the point is it's the officials and the people like me or presidents of associations. We're the ones who need to set it up so that the athletes don't have to protest. It's our responsibility. Nobody should have allowed those two boys to set up
Never.
their starting blocks on that line in the first place. And let me just say one other thing, because Rachel McKinnon says this all the time, that, you stand next to your husband, or I stand next to mine. There's some couples where the male's shorter than the female. So Rachel McKinnon says, well, just because, since there's so much overlap, there's some males that are shorter than some females and a lot of that, so that they should be able to compete with each other because the range overlaps so much.
Oh,
Well,
God.
the overlap. So I did this little mind experiment. I went and took, again, farm animals, God forbid. And I said, okay, so the withers heights range of horses. So the horse height of like the withers, which is the shoulders height, and the withers height of cows, they overlap. So why not let a horse race a cow? Like, if you're talking about overlap, when you're talking about anthropometric, like human variable characteristics, we don't select for categories on that basis. What we're talking about is when you combine all of the different overlapping features, there's actually causing a sort of categorical morphological distinction. So take racing cars. Like you can have a car that has the chassis, the four wheels, but you have Formula One and a stock car, NASCAR. You would never put a Formula One car into a NASCAR because it's a completely different category. It's a body. It's categorically different, morphologically distinct. When we're talking about males and females, measuring one variable like height or arm length or whatever, you're not capturing the morphological distinction there. I mean, the whole actual morphology and sort of category, it's just the morphology is different starting from gestation all the way through adulthood. So it doesn't even matter if they would even race kind of the same times. It's absolutely inappropriate because it's a distinct morphology. We're talking about distinct categories, and it's basically meaningless even if they were the same. They are distinct. It's like putting a cow in with a horse. Like it's just distinct. Right? Like so it doesn't even matter if there's overlap or if the times are about the same. It has nothing to do with that. You actually compete with distinct morphologies, and those are the categories. So this whole trans activist explanation about overlapping parts, and who cares?
Doesn't matter.
We're talking morphologies.
Regardless, and then
we're talking about clear morphological categorical distinctions. And the first thing, and in fact, there's 6,000 variables that differ between men and women when you look, whether it's like the physical external measurements, the physiology, their cellular level, the machines inside your cell, how they function. So there's like thousands of times more distinction between a male and a female than between, let's say, a Formula One car and a NASCAR.
Yeah.
And yet, that the very moment you would try to put a Formula One car in a NASCAR race, everybody would say, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. You're putting a Formula One car in a NASCAR race.
Exactly.
Because they're not the same bodies. It's not even the same category. So we have much a greater claim between male sports and female sports to have a distinction in our morphology. And so it's not, this is all to say, going back to the feminists and saying, stop saying that we're demeaning women here. What we're saying is women's bodies are completely distinct as which is why you're a feminist. Our bodies are distinct. Our minds are distinct. Our thinking is distinct. Stop trying to say, if we say we're distinct from men, that somehow demeans us.
Exactly. Or that's mean.
We're not saying
or
we're
something.
inferior. We're saying we're distinct. We're a distinct vehicle. We're not the same vehicle. So it has nothing to do with demeaning anything. It has the fact that we are distinct. Morphologies. Get over it. Like, come on.
I love it. And yeah, these men that are parading as women, they're absolutely winning women's races. They're absolutely taking sponsorships from women. They're absolutely taking prizes away from women and girls.
Yeah.
You better believe I earned it just looking at it. I just can't believe that fucking article. It's just ridiculous. It's just I can't.
Yeah.
Anyway, I could go on about
but these arguments, it's not feminist to have these arguments because you're basically denying. It's the same. It's just so bizarre that to say, I'm a feminist, I care about female persons, but female persons are no different than men. So why should we even talk about female persons? If we're all one big category, then why are you even talking about us? Like there's nothing logical about what they're saying. These intersectional feminists need to stop. Like what? You're not proving anything.
Oh, lib fems and whatnot.
Yeah, lib feminist. Like, what is this? Like, the very fact that you call yourself a feminist is because you're a distinct being in comparison to a male. That's what you're saying.
There's definitely
Stop
a lot
denying
of different
that.
feminists. People also don't realize that, and I didn't realize it until I became one.
Yes.
We are not the same as lib fem and
whatever
the other ones.
Well, I don't even know who I am, but all I am, I'm a coach. Listen, I'm a coach. All I cared about was being a woman in sport, female person who was an athlete. Now I'm a coach. Now I'm a leader. And I just want you to leave me alone. Like, please, people, leave sports alone. What are you trying to do? Like, stop using sport as your political weapon. Please. Exactly. The moment I can resolve this, like I got pulled into it. They came for sports. I got pulled in. I'm speaking the truth. I'm trying to reestablish some logical order here so we can extract sport from this stupid political narrative and get back to having sports. Like, stop using sports for your political, bludgeon. Like, this is ridiculous. And please, like, that's all I'm asking. The minute that goes away, I can go back to coaching. You'll never see me on Twitter again. I just want to coach.
I just want to coach.
I just want to coach.
Yes.
That's it.
All right. Well, Linda, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Oh, is there any website or where people can find you online?
Just Twitter, because you know what? Even my Facebook is mostly just family and coaching and friends. Like, I'm trying not to be so political, but I can't help it. I guess on Twitter, that's where I let loose because I'm like, okay, here it goes. And like, I can't, I can't abide this because it's going to ruin sports.
Speaking the truth.
So. Maybe eventually I might have a website eventually, maybe once the book is out and stuff. And so I can share more of the data and like that. It's not up yet, and I don't even want to say the name because I don't want some activists to start creating some websites for that name.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is, it's just so unbelievable. But anyway, you know what? I am appreciative again that so many women are fighting for this, so that I think the more effective that the states are going to be in the fight against the Biden executive order, and the more effective that the women in general are going to be at regaining our territory, the sooner I can go back to just enjoying sports and not having to worry about anything. And that's going to be a great moment.
Yes. All right. Well,
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Until next time, everybody.
I'm sure we'll see. See ya. Bye.